The expression on Patricia's face when I
Station
informed her
Bridge
she
don't
was
so much
trespassing on my private
You think
waterfront
you can just get away
was
with
worth
this?
every
You
dollar of
always
the
do.
attorney fees that ensued. Imagine this scenario. I'm positioned on my pier, gesturing toward newly installed no trespassing markers, while Homeowners Association chairwoman Patricia Morrison turns pale as snow. Her motorboat engine putters to a halt. The aroma of lake breeze and sunblock fills the humid August atmosphere. 25 residents observe from the shoreline, as Patricia suddenly comprehends she's been intimidating the legitimate property owner for several months. But here's the remarkable part. This situation wasn't merely about waterfront access. Patricia had been scheming to burden our neighborhood with $2.8 million in special assessments, using fabricated communal shoreline privileges. She believed she'd discovered the ideal victim when I inherited this estate. She couldn't have been more mistaken. What would be your response if your HOA attempted to seize your private land right before your house guests? Share your thoughts in the comments and mention your location. I'm confident your HOA has attempted something equally outrageous. Let me rewind and explain how I unintentionally became the focus of the most sophisticated property fraud I've ever encountered. My name is Daniel Riverside, and 8 months ago, I was living an entirely different existence in Denver. Recently separated, exhausted from my structural engineering career, and genuinely questioning every major decision I'd made since graduation. Then came the phone call that transformed everything. My uncle Theodore had died, bequeathing me his complete lakeside compound in Willowbrook, Vermont. Uncle Theodore wasn't just any landowner. This gentleman was essentially the unofficial guardian of Mirror Lake. He possessed 956 acres, encompassing 2.7 miles of untouched coastline. For 70 years, he'd served as the community's cherished waterfront protector. Annual fish roasts every autumn, children mastering swimming in his protected bay, neighbors freely using his watercraft. Uncle Theodore treated that lake as a shared community asset. I'd spent countless childhood summers there, absorbing lessons about riparian rights while wooden dock planks groaned beneath my weight, and the fragrance of evergreen needles mingled with whatever catch Cousin Mike was preparing. At the cleaning station, the property was extraordinary. Primary residence, guest lodges, boat ramp, plus the deteriorating remnants of an 1880s grist mill that Theodore constantly planned to rebuild next season. That's when I encountered Patricia Morrison. And this woman was truly something else. Picture her, 54 years old, self-designated Willowbrook Estate Standards Coordinator, a position that sounds legitimate until you discover she invented it herself. She'd relocated from Boston suburbs 4 years prior on a crusade to enhance neighborhood standards, which apparently involved controlling everyone's fence height and siding color choices. Always dressed in pristine white athletic wear, despite never touching a tennis racket, operating a white luxury sedan with community vanity tags, she possessed that particular intensity of someone who'd tasted the addictive power of HOA control. She arrived precisely 10 days after my arrival, notebook in hand, wearing that predatory grin that announced, "I'm about to destroy your peace. We must address your uncle's casual arrangements with the residents," she declared, positioning herself in my entrance like she held ownership rights. The rustling of documents mixed with her cologne, the expensive kind that costs $300 per bottle and seems designed to mask something rotten underneath. Here's where the situation becomes interesting. Patricia produced a 62-page neighborhood lake access contract demanding a $15,000 yearly maintenance payment. She insisted waterfront access had been an understood easement, requiring formal documentation now that ownership passed to someone from outside the community. Her pronunciation of outsider made clear she'd already labeled me as the adversary. "Your uncle was extremely accommodating regarding community requirements," she cooed. "I'm certain you'll wish to maintain that custom." I courteously refused, explaining I was still examining Theodore's paperwork. Her smile could have frozen the lake in the middle of summer. The next weekend, I organized a cookout for 12 university friends, my initial effort at recreating those memorable gatherings Theodore used to host. We were thoroughly enjoying ourselves until 3 p.m., when Hurricane Patricia descended upon my dock, clutching laminated violation citations. "Excuse me. This community maintains certain expectations," she announced, requesting a guest registry like she was operating border security. "Your uncle respected proper limitations." The smell of barbecuing steaks couldn't disguise the uncomfortable atmosphere as my friends began departing early. Celebration terminated, courtesy of the self-appointed waterfront patrol. That night, feeling as though I'd somehow dishonored Theodore's legacy, I resolved to investigate his office more systematically. Hidden behind a bookcase, I located a concealed compartment. Apparently my uncle was part scholar, part covert operative. Within a mahogany box were original property titles, survey documents, and water usage certificates dating to the 1930s. One paper made me smile widely. Mirror Lake Riparian Rights Declaration, 1931. Properly executed, witnessed, recorded with the county, establishing my family's complete ownership of the entire lake. You understand what my engineering training taught me? When individuals make assertions about your land rights, official courthouse records never deceive. Everything else amounts to hot air and desperate hoping. Patricia had been operating an extortion scheme on property she didn't possess, couldn't regulate, and held absolutely no legal jurisdiction over. I understood I wasn't confronting an overzealous neighbor. I was dealing with a swindler, and she'd just selected the wrong target. Monday morning struck me like a physical blow. I walked to my vehicle and discovered an official-appearing cease and desist notification wedged beneath my windshield wiper, its corners fluttering in the dawn breeze like a white flag. Except I wasn't surrendering. The paperwork appeared legitimate initially, elaborate header and legal sounding, terminology claiming the Willowbrook Estates homeowners association possessed exclusive recreational privileges to my shoreline. It threatened 750 daily penalties for unauthorized lake usage and bore the signature of something called Neighborhood Legal Solutions. The smell of fresh ink and desperation practically emanated from the document. Here's the issue, though. My engineering background kicked in. I invested 15 minutes examining that letterhead and realized it was more counterfeit than Patricia's community credentials. No authentic law practice uses only a mail drop for their address, and Neighborhood Legal Solutions sounded about as official as Definitely Not Fraud LLC. But Patricia's power move made me curious about what narrative she'd been selling the neighbors. So I decided to conduct some investigation. First destination, Mrs. Eleanor Schmidt, 81 years old and mentally sharp as a blade, who'd resided next door since the Reagan presidency. Patricia appeared like a whirlwind. Eleanor informed me over coffee strong enough to remove paint. The kitchen smelled of apple turnovers and justified anger. Your uncle never demanded payment from anyone in 70 years. Then suddenly, this woman materializes discussing proper oversight and community expectations. Next, I visited Robert Chen, a retired principal living 4 houses away. Robert revealed the actual bombshell. Patricia had been collecting $250 monthly lake charges from 27 families for more than 3 years. That's approximately $6,750 monthly for accomplishing absolutely nothing except generating fraudulent bills. The Martinez family, young parents who'd moved here seeking affordable lakefront living, were now paying $3,000 annually to Patricia for the privilege of accessing what they assumed was communal property. Their children wondered why they had to pay for swimming when old Mr. Riverside never charged anyone. Time for a journey to the county records office, where I spent the afternoon with Clerk Jennifer, a woman who understood property documentation like I understood engineering specifications. The musty odor of archived files mixed with the rhythmic humming of the photocopy machine as we uncovered the truth. Discovery 1. No HOA had ever been legally established for Willowbrook Estates. Zero documentation, no filing, no legal authority whatsoever. Discovery 2. Patricia's house title showed a standard residential parcel with precisely 0 water privileges. She owned her driveway and backyard, nothing more. Discovery 3. Theodore's 1971 property survey definitively documented private ownership of the complete lake, extending to the water's edge. I felt quite satisfied with my research when Thursday brought a visitor to my door. Sheriff's Officer Williams stood there appearing uncomfortable, cap in hand. "Sir, I have a complaint lodged against you for intimidation and property damage," he stated, checking his notepad. "Woman claims you destroyed the community notice board and made threats toward residents." I had to chuckle. "Officer, the only thing I've destroyed is Patricia's delusion about controlling my lake. Would you like to examine the legitimate property titles?" His eyebrows rose as I displayed the courthouse documents across my dining table. His expression was priceless. like watching someone realize they'd been attempting to arrest the homeowner for trespassing in their own residence. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "She never mentioned you actually owned the lake." We drove to Patricia's house together, where she was watering her begonias in complete tennis attire, confident smirk displayed across her face. That smirk began dissolving faster than ice cream in July when Officer Williams started explaining property law fundamentals. "Ma'am, appears there might be some misunderstanding about ownership around here," he said diplomatically. "There must be an error," Patricia stammered, the water hose striking pavement with sharp splashes. The scent of plant food and fresh mulch couldn't hide her increasing alarm. "The community has always shared lake privileges." "You're completely correct, Mrs. Morrison," I replied, maintaining my tone pleasant and rational. "My family has shared it generously for generations. But collecting payments for property you don't own, that's not sharing. That's fraud." News spread through Willowbrook faster than rumors at a town meeting. 5 families immediately stopped paying Patricia's lake charges. The general store proprietor began mentioning the property controversy to every patron. Robert Chen volunteered to help me investigate HOA establishment regulations, but Patricia wasn't finished. Friday evening delivered another final warning attached to my door, this time alleging Theodore had signed some mysterious oral contract witnessed by community veterans. She threatened to initiate legal action for violation of community agreement, impressive considering no agreement existed. That's when I realized polite correction wouldn't succeed. Patricia was escalating her madness, and I needed preparation for whatever followed next. Tuesday morning introduced a new degree of boldness that actually amazed me. I discovered a vibrant flyer in my mailbox promoting a community gathering for Thursday at 8 p.m. Subject: Shoreline access privileges and safety issues. The flyer identified Patricia as Willowbrook Estates HOA president, with qualifications that would embarrass a carnival barker. Here's the shocking part. 38 households received announcements, but somehow mine disappeared in transit. Remarkable coincidence. Eleanor contacted me that evening, and I could practically hear her eye rolling through the telephone. "That woman's been visiting door to door with some ridiculous story about you planning to barricade the entire coastline," she said. "Claims you're from another state and don't comprehend local traditions." Robert Chen reported even more scandalous gossip. Patricia was informing newer residents I intended to impose entrance fees and prohibit children from swimming. The Martinez family actually confronted me at the supermarket, their 6-year-old son gripping my shirt with tears streaming. "Are you really going to stop us from swimming, Mr. Daniel?" he asked, and my heart nearly shattered. This was psychological warfare, and Patricia was weaponizing children. Time for intelligence collection of my own. I visited Willowbrook Township headquarters to investigate community meeting permits. The clerk, a practical woman who'd probably witnessed every scam imaginable, shook her head when I described Patricia's operations. "No permit submitted, no legal HOA registration, no liability coverage," she confirmed. "If she's collecting funds and conducting official meetings, someone should notify the state attorney general." The aroma of institutional coffee and copy machine toner filled the air as she provided me copies of property records for neighboring lots. Plot twist. 4 other families actually owned their individual shoreline segments too. Patricia had been defrauding people who didn't even require her authorization to access the water. Thursday evening arrived, and I decided to interrupt Patricia's propaganda session. The community center was crowded, 50-plus residents packed into folding chairs, refreshments on card tables, and Patricia positioned at the front with a slideshow, a presentation like she was conducting a corporate board meeting. The fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead while the smell of burnt coffee mixed with anxious energy. Patricia clicked through slides depicting overcrowded lake situations, which were simply photographs from my barbecue, and cautioned about liability concerns and property value deterioration. Without professional oversight, she proclaimed, we're one incident away from lawsuits that could financially ruin this entire neighborhood. I waited until she completed her 25-minute fear campaign before rising. During the question period, Mrs. Morrison, intriguing presentation, I announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Could you clarify which legal authority granted you lake oversight privileges? You could hear complete silence. Patricia's face cycled through more color variations than a moodstone. Well, your uncle's verbal understandings and community customs, she stumbled. That's when I retrieved my folder of courthouse records and began distributing copies to the front rows. The crackling of paper sounded like autumn leaves as people examined the evidence. These are the original 1931 riparian rights declarations, I announced. They encompass the complete lake. 4 other families here also own their shoreline portions. None of us authorized anyone oversight authority. The whispers started quietly and intensified like approaching thunder. Several residents were verifying their own property titles on their smartphones. Probably for the first time in decades. Patricia attempted to redirect, claiming my documents were obsolete and that contemporary community expectations supersede historical property rights. Then she committed her crucial error, mentioning she'd already deposited $9,800 in the community lake maintenance account. So you've been collecting funds for services on property you don't own or control? I asked sweetly. That's when the dam burst. The Martinez family stood up. Wait, we've been paying for what exactly? Robert Chen, Patricia, you told us this was legally mandatory. Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos. Theodore Riverside never charged anyone a cent in 70 years. Patricia grabbed her laptop and made a rapid exit, yelling something about legal representation being contacted. The community center exploded in bewildered discussions as 15 families approached me, asking about reimbursements. Lisa Wong, who owns the local cafe, offered to organize a genuine community discussion about lake access, one based on actual facts instead of fiction. 4 residents mentioned Patricia had been photographing their properties for insurance purposes, which sounded about as legitimate as her HOA presidency. But here's where things became truly fascinating. The following morning, I found surveyor markers around my property with pending development ribbons fluttering in the breeze like surrender banners. A quick call to the county planning department revealed someone had submitted a preliminary application about subdividing my lakefront for a community recreation facility. Patricia wasn't just stealing fees anymore. She was planning to force the sale of my land through some development manipulation. The woman had evolved from petty con artist to full-scale property pirate. And honestly, I was almost impressed by her audacity. Almost. Certified mail arrived Friday morning like a legal explosive wrapped in official packaging. The sender address read, East Shore Development Partners, which sounded about as legitimate as Patricia's HOA credentials, and contained a preliminary evaluation notice that made my coffee taste like acid. The letter claimed, my lake property was under consideration for community improvement project and suggested I might benefit from collaborating with local stakeholders rather than opposing inevitable development. The return address matched that same mail drop from Patricia's counterfeit legal letters. Apparently she thought changing letterheads would deceive someone with an engineering education. Time for another visit to the county planning department, where I discovered Patricia had filed an application for community lake access enhancement, with herself listed as the official community spokesperson. The plans were stunning in their presumption. Boat launch expansion, a 60-car parking area, and seasonal rental cottages scattered across my shoreline like she was designing a vacation resort. The real shocker, the application claimed complete community endorsement with over 50 resident signatures attached. I recognized several names from Theodore's old fishing tournament records, so I started making visits. Eleanor's reaction was priceless. She never asked me to sign anything about development. I signed a petition about jet ski safety because some maniac nearly struck the Schmidt's cat. Robert Chen was equally bewildered. She said it concerned better security around the dock area, nothing about construction or parking. The pattern became obvious. Patricia had gathered signatures for various lake safety improvements, then submitted them as endorsement for her development fantasy. That's fraud, and the type that attracts federal attention when it involves wetlands and waterways. Meanwhile, Patricia launched her publicity offensive. The local newspaper published an article titled Neighborhood Seeks Resolution on Lake Access Conflict that portrayed me as some outside antagonist blocking traditional community usage. They quoted an anonymous longtime resident saying some newcomers don't appreciate small-town customs, and included a photograph of my no trespassing signs beside children gazing longingly at the water. The pressure campaign intensified with neighbors stopping by for friendly conversations. Mrs. Thompson, from across the street, appeared wringing her hands. Patricia says you're planning to install barriers and charge entrance fees like some amusement park. Young Kevin Schmidt, Eleanor's grandson, broke my heart asking if their family could earn lake privileges by doing landscaping. The smell of his grandmother's fresh-baked brownies on his clothing made the conversation even more heartbreaking. But Patricia's masterpiece was telling residents that attorneys advised her I could legally prevent emergency boat access for drowning rescues. She was literally claiming I might allow people to die over property disputes. The woman had progressed from petty scammer to complete sociopath, Lisa. Wong mentioned a strange conversation where Patricia had inquired about seasonal tourism, possibilities, and whether the cafe could accommodate increased summer traffic. That got me investigating, and I found Patricia had been researching community-managed recreational facilities online. Hidden in her car one day, I spotted a journal with financial projections, $75 daily boat rentals, $40 swimming passes, $300 fishing permits. She wasn't just planning to steal my property. She was planning to transform Mirror Lake into her personal profit center. Time to bring in professional assistance. I contacted attorney Margaret Stone in Burlington, a sharp woman who specialized in property rights and HOA conflicts. Her evaluation was direct. This is fraud with potential real estate conspiracy elements. Document everything, avoid direct confrontation, and let her incriminate herself further. Margaret warned that if the development application proceeded, it could trigger an expensive legal battle even though I'd ultimately prevail. She's gambling you'll surrender rather than fight, she explained. Classic intimidation strategy. The community was dividing into camps. Eleanor's group, longtime residents who remembered Theodore's generosity, versus Patricia's supporters, convinced I was a greedy outsider. Then there were the undecided who just wanted their children to continue swimming without drama. Patricia escalated again by filing a complaint with the township about hazardous swimming conditions at my property. She claimed insufficient lighting, dangerous pier conditions, and no lifeguard supervision made the lake a public safety risk, requiring community oversight. The sound of her heels clicking across the township office floor echoed like gunshots as she demanded official action. But I was learning something important about Patricia. She couldn't control herself. Every lie required bigger lies. Every scheme demanded more elaborate schemes. Robert suggested letting her continue digging while Eleanor's wisdom proved true. Your uncle always said the truth surfaces when people get greedy enough, so I decided to set a trap. I started mentioning to various neighbors that I was considering compromise options and might be willing to formalize lake access arrangements under certain conditions. Word reached Patricia within hours and I could practically see the dollar signs dancing in her eyes. She thought she was breaking me down. In reality, I was just getting started, and Patricia was about to discover that some battles you really shouldn't pick. That weekend, I finally decided to properly tackle Theodore's locked mahogany chest. I'd been postponing it, partly from grief and partly because the antique combination lock seemed impossible to decode. But sitting in his study, surrounded by the aroma of old leather books and pipe tobacco that still lingered in the wood, I remembered something he used to say, "Daniel, the most important secrets hide in plain sight. The combination wasn't random numbers, it was my birthday." Because naturally it was. The old man had always been sentimental like that. Inside, beneath the property titles I'd already located, lay a treasure collection that made my engineering mind practically hum with satisfaction. Correspondence with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, dating from 2003 to 2022, official documents with state seals, and then the revelation that changed everything. Mirror Lake had been designated as a critical watershed protection zone in 2004, with my uncle serving as the legal steward. But here's the remarkable part. The state had been paying him $52,000 annually for conservation management for 18 years. I kept searching and found something even better. In 2018, Theodore had established the Mirror Lake Environmental Trust with me as the automatic beneficiary upon his death. The trust contained $390,000 in accumulated conservation funds, plus ongoing annual payments for maintaining the ecosystem. My hands were literally trembling as I read through EPA classifications, showing the lake supported endangered freshwater mussels and rare native bass species.
Any construction within 750 feet of the shoreline required federal environmental impact studies.
Patricia's development plans would violate 4 separate federal environmental protection laws with automatic penalties of $75,000 per day for unauthorized development. But the most beautiful irony was buried in the trust documentation. As the legal steward, I was actually required to maintain public access for educational and recreational use. Patricia's demands for community access were already legally mandated, but without any fees, management companies, or fake HOA nonsense. I called Margaret Stone immediately, even though it was Saturday night. "Your uncle was brilliant," she said after I read her the trust provisions. "This structure makes you legally untouchable. Patricia's development application will trigger automatic federal investigation when they discover she's planning to develop protected watershed." Margaret explained that fee collection becomes wire fraud when combined with false development claims. She's not just running a local scam anymore, she's committed federal crimes. The strategic advantage was mind-blowing. Instead of just defending my property rights, I could now provide genuine community benefits using trust funds, handicap-accessible docks, native species education programs, annual conservation festivals. Everything Patricia had promised, but better, legal and free. "Let her proceed with the development application," Margaret advised. "Federal agencies will investigate and discover the fraud during environmental review. Meanwhile, you transform from selfish inheritor to environmental steward in the public eye." I spent Sunday evening reading through Theodore's detailed notes about his conservation plans. He'd sketched designs for wheelchair-accessible fishing piers, educational signage about local wildlife, even ideas for a summer program teaching children about watershed protection. The old man had been thinking decades ahead, building legal protections that would outlast him. Monday morning, I had my strategy. I wouldn't just expose Patricia's scam. I'd replace her entire fake operation with something legitimate and beneficial. Let her dig herself deeper while I built something that actually served the community she claimed to represent. The irony was perfect. Patricia thought she was stealing lakefront property for profit. In reality, she was about to trigger a federal investigation of her own crimes, while I used conservation money to provide everything she'd promised, but legally and ethically. Some days I really missed that old man, but right then, sitting in his study with legal dynamite spread across his desk, I felt like he was still protecting me. Tuesday evening found me hosting what I like to call my strategy session around Theodore's old kitchen table. The smell of Eleanor's homemade oatmeal cookies mixed with the evening light reflecting off the lake through the windows as I laid out my battle plan to the core team. Eleanor, Robert Chen, Lisa Wong, and attorney Margaret Stone, who'd driven up from Burlington with a briefcase full of legal ammunition. "Folks," Margaret began, spreading documents across the table like a general planning an offensive, "we're not just stopping a scammer here. We're about to turn Daniel into the community hero, while Patricia accidentally commits federal crimes." The strategy was beautiful in its simplicity, a three-pronged attack that would expose Patricia's fraud while positioning me as the legitimate community steward I'd inherited the responsibility to be. Prong one was environmental protection. Margaret filed formal notification with the EPA about unauthorized development applications in protected watershed. "This automatically triggers federal investigation," she explained, the satisfaction evident in her voice. "When they discover Patricia's funding sources and signature fraud, it becomes a criminal matter." While the feds got involved, I announced free environmental education programs using the trust funds. The messaging was perfect, following Theodore's conservation legacy while ensuring proper community access. Instead of fighting community demands, I was exceeding them legally. Prong two was systematic fraud documentation. Robert and Eleanor became my volunteer private investigators, interviewing neighbors about Patricia's signature collection methods. Vermont allows one-party consent recording, so they started documenting every conversation. Lisa Wong kept detailed notes about Patricia's discussions of profitable lake management schemes. Margaret subpoenaed the community maintenance account bank records, which revealed a paper trail of electronic transfers that crossed state lines, turning local fraud into federal wire fraud charges. Prong three was providing the community alternative Patricia had promised, but could never deliver. I announced a Mirror Lake Heritage Festival for Labor Day weekend, completely free and funded by the Conservation Trust. Free boat rides, fishing lessons for children, environmental education stations, historical displays about Theodore's 70 years of stewardship. The visual contrast would be devastating. Professional community programming versus Patricia's amateur power grab. I spent the next week using trust funds for infrastructure improvements that put Patricia's promises to shame. Professional dock repairs, safety lighting that actually worked, life ring stations at proper intervals. The wheelchair-accessible fishing pier from Theodore's sketches became reality. Built to ADA specifications with help from my engineering background, Margaret's paralegals set up a comprehensive documentation system. Every interaction with Patricia got recorded. Every communication went through the attorney's office to establish legal precedent. 4 neighbors agreed to witness any harassment or trespassing attempts. The psychological warfare was my favorite part. I started being aggressively friendly to Patricia in public, always waving, asking about her day, mentioning upcoming free community events. Beautiful morning, isn't it, Patricia? Perfect weather for festival planning. The woman couldn't figure out why I wasn't intimidated anymore. Lisa Wong contacted the newspaper editor to correct their previous biased coverage. The news story angle: Inherited Conservation Trust provides free community lake programs. We arranged photos of me with local children at the new accessible fishing pier, plus expert quotes from EPA representatives confirming the environmental protection importance. I organized a property rights and community law information session at the library with Margaret as guest speaker. She explained the difference between legitimate HOAs and fraud operations, providing handouts about verifying legal registration and understanding legitimate fees. Knowledge is power, and I was arming the community with facts. The bait was almost too easy. I accidentally mentioned to Patricia's remaining supporters that I was considering formalizing lake access agreements through proper legal channels. Word reached Patricia within hours, and I could see her thinking she might still salvage her scheme through negotiation. The federal response was swift and decisive. EPA investigators arrived within 72 hours of Margaret's notification, sending official letters about investigation of unauthorized development in protected watershed. The development application was frozen immediately with Patricia's plans under federal scrutiny. Even better, the EPA forwarded evidence of fee collection to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit for wire fraud investigation. What started as petty neighborhood drama had escalated to federal criminal charges. Community momentum was building beautifully. Word spread about the free festival and professional safety improvements. Even former Patricia supporters started questioning why they'd been paying fees for services that were now being provided legitimately at no cost. 18 families volunteered for festival organization, and local businesses got excited about the tourism potential of actual environmental programs rather than Patricia's fake development schemes. But my favorite moment came when I realized I'd learned something crucial about property inheritance that most people never discover. Environmental protections often include grant funding for improvements. I called the State Environmental Agency and discovered additional programs available for watershed conservation. The trap was set. The federal investigation was underway, and the community was rallying around legitimate programming. Patricia thought she was wearing me down through intimidation. She had no idea she was about to face the full weight of federal environmental law. Tuesday morning hit Patricia like a freight train carrying federal paperwork. The EPA investigation notice arrived at the township office, and according to the clerk who called me laughing, Patricia stormed in demanding to know who sabotaged the community development project. Her voice echoed through the building as she accused me of lying about environmental status to block legitimate community improvements. The clerk's response was priceless. "Ma'am, you can't develop protected watershed without federal permits. That's been law for decades." But Patricia wasn't surrendering without a fight. Wednesday night, I discovered my dock safety lights had been disconnected, and the life ring station mysteriously relocated to someone's garage. Thursday morning brought an even bolder escalation. Fake. Private property, no swimming signs posted around my entire shoreline, complete with forged by order of Willowbrook Township footers. The sound of my hammer clanging against metal stakes echoed across the water as I removed the illegal signage. The smell of treated lumber and fresh hardware store tags told me these signs were expensive. Patricia was investing serious money in her harassment campaign. That's when her social media blitz exploded across the internet. The local Facebook group became a battlefield, with Patricia posting photos and rants about the out-of-state millionaire blocking lake access. She claimed the EPA investigation was my attempt to weaponize environmental law against the community. Her photo manipulation skills were almost impressive. She'd cropped images of me removing her fake signs to make it look like I was destroying legitimate safety notices. The comment threads turned into 300 message wars between neighbors who'd never argued about anything stronger than snow removal schedules. But Patricia's smear campaign got personal fast. She started telling neighbors I planned to charge admission for lake access like a theme park, and claimed Theodore was forced to sign environmental papers by government bureaucrats. Then she attacked my divorce, spreading rumors I was fleeing legal troubles in Colorado. 4 festival volunteers withdrew after hearing her stories, and I watched the community divide deepen. Eleanor and Robert started recording conversations whenever Patricia approached them, building our evidence file while protecting themselves from her increasingly desperate lies. Margaret's paralegal documented every fake social media post, screenshot every defamatory comment. "She's building our harassment case for us," Margaret noted with professional satisfaction. Desperate people make stupid mistakes. Friday evening brought Patricia's most brazen move yet, a personal visit to my door with what she called a compromise proposal. I'd been expecting this, so my phone was recording when she launched into her pitch. "Look, we both know you can't fight the whole community forever," she said, fidgeting with her tennis bracelet. "Why not make some money instead of enemies?" Her offer was beautifully incriminating. I could keep the lakefront house, but the community would manage lake access for everyone's benefit. She offered me 35% of management fees in exchange for a property use agreement. "Think about it," she continued, not realizing she was confessing to attempted bribery on recording. 52 families paying $250 monthly. That's over $130,000 annually. Your cut would be $45,000 for doing absolutely nothing. I pretended to consider her offer while she dug herself deeper. "The development application is just leverage," she admitted. "Once you sign the management agreement, we withdraw those plans." 25 minutes of recorded confession later, Patricia left thinking she'd finally found my price. In reality, she'd just handed me evidence of conspiracy, attempted bribery, and admission that her development plans were fraudulent from the start. The federal investigation accelerated over the weekend. EPA investigators arrived for a site visit and discovered Patricia's unauthorized signage scattered around the property. Margaret explained that forging government agency notices was a federal crime, separate from the environmental violations. Monday brought FBI financial crimes agents requesting records of Patricia's community account. Wire fraud charges were escalating because her electronic fee transfers crossed state lines, making it federal jurisdiction. The community was fracturing under the pressure. Anonymous flyers appeared claiming I'd hired federal agents to intimidate neighbors, which was both hilarious and tragic. Eleanor organized a Support Daniel response with a factual timeline of events, while local businesses started choosing sides based on economic interests. The saddest part was watching children ask their parents why they couldn't swim at the lake anymore because of Patricia's fake signs. That's when I knew the gloves were coming off completely. Saturday morning, I discovered the new accessible fishing pier had been vandalized. Handrails bent, decking boards pried loose, chains wrapped around the boat launch dock to prevent access. The sheriff's deputy who filed the vandalism report shook his head in disgust. "Ma'am's really lost it now. I installed trail cameras around the property perimeter and they immediately paid off." Sunday evening footage showed Patricia herself removing one of my cameras from a tree, apparently not realizing the other cameras were watching her destroy evidence in a federal investigation. Obstruction of justice is a felony. Patricia had just escalated from local scammer to federal criminal, and she'd done it all on camera. Monday morning delivered Patricia's nuclear option, a certified letter from the Willowbrook Community Legal Defense Fund that was so audacious I actually laughed out loud. She was threatening to sue me for exclusionary practices that allegedly violated civil rights and community standards. The letterhead looked like it came from a discount print shop, complete with stock photo scales of justice. But here's where it gets interesting. She was soliciting $750 donations from neighbors for legal action against the property monopolist. That's me, apparently. The letter was signed by a community legal advocate who, according to Margaret's quick bar association search, had about as much legal standing as my neighbor's golden retriever. Meanwhile, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit was having a field day with Patricia's banking records. They discovered $1,700 in her main community account from 52 families, plus a secret second account labeled Lake Development Reserve Fund, containing another $1,100. Wire fraud evidence was piling up like snow in a Vermont winter, with electronic transfers from residents in 4 different states. Snowbirds paying remotely for services that didn't exist. Margaret filed a comprehensive civil suit against Patricia while the federal investigation continued. We're not just seeking damages, she explained. This includes class action elements to recover stolen, fees for every resident she defrauded. The environmental angle added serious weight. Threatening protected watershed areas brings federal prosecutors running. My trail cameras were working overtime and they captured something beautiful. Patricia and an unknown man surveying my property boundaries at midnight. Like discount cat burglars, a quick background check revealed the man was an unlicensed development consultant with a history of land fraud schemes across 4 states. The bigger picture was becoming clear. Patricia wasn't just a local scammer. She was part of an organized effort targeting vulnerable inherited properties, specifically looking for elderly property owners and their heirs who might not understand their legal rights. Patricia organized an emergency community meeting at her house Tuesday evening, complete with an agenda to formally petition township for eminent domain action. The intimidation tactics were getting desperate. She suggested families who didn't support the action might lose all lake access permanently and warned that legal costs would be split only among committed community members. Margaret contacted the township attorney proactively, informing them about the unauthorized meetings and fake legal threats. The township's response was swift and decisive. An official notice clarifying that no HOA was registered, no eminent domain action was planned, and residents should be aware that participating in fraudulent fee collection could expose them to legal liability. The surveillance footage kept delivering evidence like holiday presents. My cameras revealed Patricia had been accessing other neighbors' properties without permission, photographing and measuring multiple shoreline lots. She wasn't just targeting my inheritance, she was casing the entire neighborhood for similar schemes. The FBI requested all surveillance footage for their broader investigation into what they now suspected was an interstate fraud operation. Patricia had gone from small-town scammer to federal fugitive without even realizing it. The regional newspaper picked up the story with devastating coverage. Local woman accused of lake access fraud. The article included photos of her fake signs, forged documents, and unauthorized development plans. Community reaction was swift. 6 families immediately demanded refunds of their community fees, and several others started asking uncomfortable questions about where their money had actually gone. Wednesday evening brought Patricia's psychological breakdown to my doorstep. She appeared obviously distressed, her usual tennis outfit wrinkled and her perfect hair disheveled. The smell of desperation was practically radiating off her as she launched into a rambling confession. I got in over my head, she admitted, tears mixing with mascara. I really wanted to help the community, but everything spiraled out of control. Then came the blame shifting. You're destroying neighborhood unity. These are innocent families who trusted me. But her final threat chilled me to the bone. Some people are really angry about this federal investigation. I can't guarantee your safety if you keep pushing. That was it. I called the sheriff's department immediately and Margaret filed for a restraining order. The next morning, the sheriff increased patrols around my property and briefed his deputies about the ongoing federal investigation. They scheduled security presence for the Labor Day festival, treating Patricia's threat as credible. The beautiful irony was watching her alliance crumble in real time. Even her strongest supporters began distancing themselves as the legal exposure became clear. Families who'd paid development fees realized their money might never be recovered, and former inner circle members started avoiding her, calls to protect themselves from legal implications. But the sweetest moment came when families started approaching me to apologize and ask about festival participation. The community was healing itself. choosing legitimate programming over Patricia's fraudulent schemes. I announced the festival would proceed as planned despite recent community tensions, emphasizing positive community building and environmental education. Professional event management, law enforcement presence, and regional media coverage were all arranged. The final bait was mentioning the festival would include a presentation about the lake's legal history and community rights. Patricia thought she was facing a simple property dispute. She had no idea she was about to be exposed in front of federal agents, regional media, and 300 community members who'd finally learned the truth. Labor Day dawned perfect, crystal blue skies reflecting off the lake like a postcard, with the smell of grilling hamburgers already drifting across the water by 11 a.m. Over 300 community members and visitors streamed onto the festival grounds. Children shrieking with delight as they splashed in the swimming area, while parents marveled at the professional setup arranged with conservation trust funds. Colorful tents and banners fluttered in the breeze. Volunteer stations hummed with activity, and 4 news crews positioned themselves strategically around the main pavilion. The high school marching band provided soundtrack while food trucks lined the access road, generating an estimated $20,000 in local business revenue. This was what legitimate community programming looked like. Historical displays showcased Theodore's 70 years of conservation work, complete with wildlife photography and interactive stations where kids could learn about endangered freshwater mussels. The new wheelchair-accessible fishing pier was packed with families, and the professional liability insurance I'd purchased meant everyone could relax and enjoy themselves without worry. At 3:15 p.m., right on schedule, Patricia made her entrance. She marched across the festival grounds like a woman possessed, clipboard clutched in one hand and 2 remaining supporters trailing behind her like confused ducklings. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as she beelined toward my information tent, her white tennis outfit practically glowing with righteous fury. "This illegal gathering needs to end immediately," she announced loud enough for half the festival to hear. The smell of sunscreen and lake water couldn't mask the tension that suddenly crackled through the air. I was ready for her. "Mrs. Morrison, so glad you could make it to our community celebration. Beautiful day, isn't it?" But Patricia wasn't here for pleasantries. She demanded I provide event permits and insurance documentation, then produced a laminated badge identifying her as a community safety inspector, apparently her latest invented credential. As elected HOA president, she declared for the crowd's benefit, "I'm shutting down this unauthorized commercial activity." The murmur of confused voices rippled through the gathering families. Some started packing up, unsure what was happening. That's when I made my move. "I appreciate your concern for community safety," I said calmly, handing her a folder thick with official documents. "Here are all the permits filed with the township, comprehensive insurance coverage for all activities, and documentation from our professional safety coordinator." Patricia's face flushed as she rifled through legitimate paperwork that demolished her authority claims. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. "Could you show everyone your official credentials for inspecting community events?" I asked sweetly. That's when she made her fatal mistake, producing that fake HOA registration certificate with obvious forgeries and claiming authority she'd never possessed. News cameras zoomed in on her laminated lies while phones appeared throughout the crowd, recording everything. I walked to the sound system and asked for the microphone. "Folks, Mrs. Morrison has raised important questions about legal authority here. I'd like to clarify exactly who has legal standing over Mirror Lake." The festival's large screen lit up with projected copies of property deeds, EPA designations, and conservation trust documentation. 300 people fell silent as I walked them through the 1931 Water Rights Grant, Theodore's surveys, and current legal ownership. "The EPA official attending today's festival can confirm our federal watershed designation," I continued, gesturing to Agent Martinez, who nodded professionally. "Mrs. Morrison, I'd like to announce that this is all private property, and you've been trespassing for months while collecting fees for services you had no authority to provide." The crowd's reaction was electric. Nervous laughter mixed with gasps of understanding, as people realized they'd been watching a con artist in action. Patricia's desperation became increasingly unhinged as she claimed I'd bought off federal agents and forged historical documents, but her self-incrimination was beautiful to witness. "I've been protecting this community's rights for 4 years," she shouted. I collected over $2,800 in legitimate community fees for proper lake management. That's when Sheriff Deputy Garcia stepped forward with perfect timing. "Ma'am, FBI has a warrant for your arrest on federal fraud charges." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the suddenly silent festival grounds as charges were read. Wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of government documents, obstruction of federal investigation. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with lake air as Patricia's remaining supporters backed away like she'd become radioactive. Regional news cameras captured every moment of the dramatic arrest during what was supposed to be a family-friendly community festival. Children continued playing in the background, oblivious to the adult drama, perfectly symbolizing community resilience. But here's what I'm most proud of. Instead of gloating, I immediately redirected attention back to the celebration. Let's focus on what brought us together today, celebrating this beautiful lake and our amazing community. I announced the annual festival would continue indefinitely, funded by the Conservation Trust, and invited even Patricia's former supporters to participate in legitimate programming going forward. The hashtag, our Crystal Lake Festival, started trending regionally within hours, with overwhelmingly positive coverage of community spirit triumphing over fraud. Local businesses reported their best Labor Day sales in years, and the story got picked up by fraud prevention websites nationwide. Sometimes, justice isn't just about winning, it's about building something better than what came before. 1 week after Patricia's dramatic arrest, the dust had settled into something beautiful. She pleaded guilty to 4 felony fraud charges, agreeing to pay $62,000 in restitution to avoid a lengthy federal trial. The community restitution meeting I organized at the Township Hall was packed. Every defrauded family received full refunds, plus interest calculated from their first payment to Patricia's fraudulent scheme. Eleanor wiped away tears as she got her $6,000 back. "Your uncle would be so proud," she told me, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "You turned something ugly into something beautiful." The property restoration moved quickly once federal agents finished processing the crime scene. Trail damage was repaired. The fishing pier was completed with handrails that actually met safety codes, and the new security system meant everyone could enjoy the lake without worrying about midnight vandals. Margaret's civil lawsuit settled for an additional $95,000, with Patricia agreeing to a permanent restraining order and public apology that was published in the regional newspaper. She lost her house to pay legal fees and restitution. Her husband filed for divorce, and her adult children cut contact after the social media infamy went viral. But here's what really matters. I established the legitimate Mirror Lake Community Council, with elected representatives from surrounding families. Monthly watershed protection workshops became so popular we had waiting lists. Children's nature programs taught kids about endangered species while they splashed in the same swimming holes I'd used 40 years earlier. The annual festival became a regional attraction, generating real economic development for local businesses. Lisa Wong's Cafe saw a 30% revenue increase during festival weekends, and the County Tourism Board featured our conservation success story in their official guide. Personally, I found something I'd been missing since the divorce: purpose. The township elected me to the board specifically to focus on environmental protection, and dating Lisa felt natural after months of working together on community programs. I decided to stay permanently, honoring Theodore's stewardship legacy while building something new. The Conservation Trust expanded beyond my wildest dreams. University of Vermont established a field research station at the lake, studying our native base population recovery, up 45% in the first year of professional management. Dead zones were cleared, invasive species removed, and native plants re-established using scientific restoration methods. Vermont's Attorney General's office now uses our case to educate communities about HOA fraud prevention. The state legislature passed the Community Conservation Protection Act based on our experience, strengthening oversight of HOA formation and protecting inherited conservation properties from development pressure. Federal recognition came when Mirror Lake became a model for community-based watershed protection nationwide. Environmental stewardship success stories featured us in a documentary that aired on PBS, and I've spoken at property rights seminars across 5 states. But my favorite outcome is watching the community heal itself. 35 families now participate in regular lake maintenance and conservation activities. Eleanor became our volunteer historian, documenting the lake's conservation legacy for future generations. The high school environmental club adopted water quality monitoring as their annual project, with students earning college scholarships through the Theodore Riverside Environmental Scholarship I established. This year's festival attracted over 750 visitors, raising $18,000 for regional watershed protection programs. Local children call it the best lake ever during summer swimming programs, and honestly, that's worth more than any legal victory. Looking forward, the Conservation Trust has funding to acquire additional threatened watershed properties. 4 neighboring counties approached me about expanding the conservation model, and were facing new pressure from a casino resort company targeting adjacent lots. But that's a story for another time. As Theodore always said, the lake doesn't belong to any one person. We're all just temporary stewards. Eleanor's wisdom proved prophetic. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind folks what community really means. And Lisa's perspective became my guiding principle. The best revenge against fraud is building something honest and beautiful. The sweetest irony? Patricia thought she was stealing lakefront property for profit. Instead, she triggered federal protection that made the area more valuable and more protected than ever before. Her greed exposed a fraud network targeting rural communities, leading to prosecutions across 4 states. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about justice. Speaking of justice, share your thoughts about the craziest thing your HOA has tried to pull. I bet you've got stories that would make Patricia look reasonable. Remember, folks, the best defense against property fraud is knowledge. Know your rights, verify all claims, and never forget that legitimate community organizations operate transparently with proper legal registration. That's a wrap for today's community justice story. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, share your thoughts in the comments and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. The best defense against these schemes is an informed community that knows their rights.